Alright, so we're going to do a quick discussion of Scarlet Letter. So I had you guys read first two chapters, last two chapters, and I told you the middle part. So what I want you to take away from Scarlet Letter, and if you've never read it, definitely go read it in full. It's a seminal text. It's one that you would read in any extended sort of early class or something like that if you had time. So the thing about Scarlet Letter is that it is an attack on Puritanism. So it's an attack on the sort of archaic Puritan religious beliefs, on the superstitions, the basically everything that Nathaniel Hawthorne had to live with growing up. You read his biography, you know that he lived in Salem. He was never comfortable there. He was never comfortable with Puritanism either. So it's not a happy place for him, and that's why he wrote this in reaction to that. So remember that Romanticism is a direct reaction to the Enlightenment. So he is directly reacting against Enlightenment principles here. He's reacting against rigidity. He's reacting against narrow idealism, things like that. He's pursuing the creative opening of the soul. So if you'll notice, there's a lot of focus on aesthetics with Pearl. I told you that she is often adorning herself, or she's running free and talking to everyone and smiling, and she's beautiful. You're not supposed to notice these things about women in Puritan beliefs. Women are supposed to be plain and simple, not worrying about their physical features. They're supposed to be humble servants of the Lord. So Pearl's attributes of Romanticism, essentially. She's the lover, she's the poet, she's a young version of these things, but she does represent these ideals. She's beautiful and pale. You're not supposed to notice these things, but the two people who have sinned see this. So Hester knows how beautiful her daughter is, and she sees more and more and more her behavior not as a source of shame, but as a source of pride. And so we have the representation of moving between Enlightenment and Romanticism through Hester's eyes. And then Arthur Dimmesdale, he sees her first as purely representation of his sin, as just the object of his sin. But the more he gets to know Pearl, the more beauty he sees in her, and it actually drives him to the revelation at the end where he has religious absolution. So the very last part that I had you guys read, you saw his sort of madness and his meltdown, but we see that it wasn't actually madness. We see that it was the only way, he says, to be forgiven by God. So no amount of prayers, no amount of abstaining from earthly pleasures, no amount of self. We assume a type of self-mutilation with when he reveals the A on his chest, the red A on his chest, as a type of punishment. This hellfire and damnation element that we've seen from John Winthrop, from other people, we see that is not what saves him here. What saves him, as he says, is coming clean with his sin and fully embracing Pearl and Hester. So fully embracing what they represent, which is a type of freedom from Puritanism. So on page 590, he says, God knows he's merciful. He hath proved his mercy, but most of all in my afflictions. And he says, God gave me this torture, and that is what's setting me free. So it's not me torturing myself. It's God torturing me with Roger Chillingsworth was another source of torture for him, and he says that's okay because that's what God was doing to me, and that's the only way to absolve my sin. So he says, had any of these agonies been wanting, I had been lost forever. Praise be his name. He will be done. Farewell. So he dies on the scaffold. Hester's holding him in his arms. Little Pearl is next to him, holding his hand. And then we have our sort of conclusion. So we learn that the governor has passed away eventually, and he's left most of his fortune and his property to little Pearl because he adored her. And we find that the Scarlet Letter, that Hester and Pearl disappear for many years. They don't know where they've gone, but when they return, many years later, sort of a generation has come and gone, we see a woman standing on the threshold, and you see her turn around and you see a red scarlet letter A on her. And at this time, they says that the scarlet letter comes to become something else. So it comes to represent, instead of sin and shame, it comes to represent, it says on page 593, it ceased to be a stigma, which attracted the world's scorn and bitterness, and became a type of something to be sorrowed over and looked upon with awe, yet reverence too. So Hester has been elevated for her faithfulness to Arthur Dimmesdale and to her daughter, into something else, something almost reverential. But she doesn't partake in the pleasures of the world. So she and Pearl represent two sides. She sticks with the Puritan side, and Pearl represents sort of the new Romanticism. We find out that we don't know exactly what happened to Pearl, but we find out that Hester's house is furnished with beautiful items that she says she doesn't need, but beautiful items nonetheless. We find out that she's knitting a little baby bonnet or a little baby outfit at one point, so we assume that she's become a grandmother. And there's rumors going around that Pearl is beautiful. She's a young woman. She's beautiful. She is healthy, happy. She's a mother. She's a wife. So she's done everything exactly right as she was supposed to do. So we see that Hester decides to stick around Salem, and she lives her life with the red A on her as a reminder to herself that it is not a source of scorn or derision, but a source of survival and pride, if you will. So Hester is really one of our, if you think about it, one of the first almost feminist heroines written by a male author. There's not many. So that is Scarlet Letter. I hope you enjoyed it. It is, like I said, one of the most seminal texts that you have to read when you read romantic literature, because it speaks so directly against many of the principles of the Enlightenment and Puritanism and strict religious beliefs, things like that. And if you'll remember, we have the scene, I want to point this out, the scene in the forest. Hester specifically says, we cannot let the world, when they return, when little Pearl has sort of ruined the moment, if you will, she says that we cannot let, the world of the town and the world of the forest are not the same. In other words, the freedom that comes with nature is constricted and crushed and just smashed into smithereens by the town, so by civilization. So once again, we have this focus on the freeing power of nature and the idea that is what we are supposed to be living for. This type of life, this type of restrictive religious belief and societal judgment is not what we should be living for in Romanticism. We need that freedom. We need Pearl's youth and vivacity and all of these wonderful things. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And I'm going to have you guys move on to the next section.